Nobody moved. Not Tae-sung, whose back was pressed so hard against the wall that the frame of the Last Supper painting had tilted sideways above his head. Not the couple by the window, who had stopped breathing somewhere between Enzo's boot hitting the door and his gun finding its mark. Not even the ceiling fan, which seemed to slow itself out of respect for the violence that was about to happen. Enzo kept his eyes on Tae-sung and took one step forward. He had waited 3 years for this. 3 years of bad intel, cold trails, and borrowed time. 3 years of waking up at 2 a.m. with his father's voice in his ear. Finish it, Enzo. Finish what they started. And now here the man was 10 feet away, smelling like fried plantain and cheap cologne, shaking so hard his collar was vibrating. You ran a long way, Enzo said. His voice was low. Flat. The voice he used when the decision was already made. For nothing. Tae-sung opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Enzo raised the gun. And the waitress spoke. The words hit him before his brain could sort them. Korean, but not the soft, everyday Korean he had heard in restaurants or on television. This was something older. Heavier. The kind of Korean his father used to speak behind closed doors, in low tones, when he thought Enzo was asleep. The kind that carried the weight of secrets and old blood. 내려놔요, 리틀 드래곤. 아버지가 소금의 집에서 혈육을 죽이라고 가르치진 않으셨잖아요. Put the steel away, little dragon. Your father didn't teach you to kill kin in a house of salt. Enzo's arm did not lower. But his finger, the one curled around the trigger, went completely still. Little dragon. That was not a name anyone called him. That was not a name anyone outside of one specific household in Seoul had ever known. His father had given him that name when he was 6 years old, sitting on a kitchen floor in a city Enzo had spent his whole adult life pretending he had never lived in. It was not in any file. It was not tattooed anywhere on his body. It lived in exactly one place, the part of his memory he kept locked and never visited. He turned his head. The waitress stood behind the counter with one hand flat on the surface and the other pointing at him. Her braids were neat. Her apron was straight. She looked like someone who had just caught a customer trying to leave without paying. Calm, certain, and completely unafraid. Enzo's men exchanged a look behind him. He could feel their confusion without seeing it. Who are you? He asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She didn't answer. Not yet. She just held his gaze the way deep water holds a stone, steady, patient, and very, very deep. That was when Ada moved. He felt her before he saw her. Small fingers closed around his gun hand, not grabbing, not panicking, just redirecting, and he looked down to find a child in an orange dress standing beside him like she belonged there, like she had always been there, like she had been waiting for him to arrive, so she could finally fix the problem he represented. Your elbow is too high, she said, pushing his arm 3 inches to the left with surprising firmness. And your line of fire goes through that third table. 2 people. You'd clip the gas line in the kitchen on the second shot. She looked up at him. The whole room goes. Enzo stared at her. She stared back, waiting, like a teacher who had asked a question and was giving him time to figure out the answer on his own. Behind him,
one of his men made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been genuine fear. Enzo could not blame him. He was feeling something close to both himself.
Tae-sung had stopped shaking. That was the detail that finally reached through everything else and grabbed Enzo by the throat. The man who should have been the most terrified person in the room was now watching him with steady eyes. Not the eyes of a man who was about to die. The eyes of a man who had been waiting for someone to finally show up. Nobody laughed. That was the first thing Marco noticed. In 15 years of working for Enzo Caruso, he had seen grown men cry, beg, and lose control of their legs. He had seen things that would make most people forget their own names. But he had never, not once, seen his boss stand completely still while a child held his gun hand and lectured him about angles. And nobody laughed. Because something about the way Ada Chikazi stood made laughing feel like a very bad idea. She was small, 9 years old, maybe 10, with neat braids and a bright orange dress that had no business being inside a moment this dangerous. She barely reached Enzo's elbow. But her feet were planted on that diner floor like she had personally chosen that exact spot and intended to stay there. And her hand around Enzo's wrist was not the grip of a frightened child reaching for safety. It was a correction. You're also standing too square, she said, looking up at Enzo with calm, serious eyes. If someone comes through that door right now, you have no pivot room. You'd have to move your whole body instead of just rotating. She glanced at the door, then back at him. That costs you about 2 seconds. Maybe more. Marco looked at Dante. Dante looked at Marco. Neither of them moved. Enzo had not moved either. His gun was still in his hand, now angled slightly left where Ada had redirected it. And he was looking down at this child with an expression Marco had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was not amusement. It was the specific look of a man who has just heard something true that he did not want to hear, coming from a direction he never expected. Step back, Enzo said to her. His voice was careful, controlled. The way you speak when you are working very hard to stay calm. Right now. In a moment, Ada said. Just like that. Plain and simple. Like he had asked her to wait while she finished a sentence in a book. She turned slightly and pointed toward the large window at the front of the diner. There's a sight line from the building across the street. 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. It's been open for 11 minutes. She pointed to the side door near the kitchen. That one has a broken lock. Has had one for about a week. Based on the scratch marks on the frame. She pointed up. And the mirror above the counter gives a full view of the back entrance. Whoever is watching this room right now, and someone is watching, can see every corner except one. She pointed to a spot near the jukebox. Just to the left of where Taesung was standing. That one, she said. The room was so quiet that the jukebox hum sounded loud. Marco felt something cold move through his chest. He had done this kind of room assessment himself, many times, and it took training and experience, and usually a lot more than 11 minutes. He looked at the window she had pointed to. He looked at the side door. He looked at the mirror. She was right. About all of it. Who taught you that? Dante asked. He hadn't meant to speak. The words just came out. Ada looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has asked a question slightly beside the point. I read, she said. Then she turned back to Enzo. You came in through the front, which means whoever sent you here already knew your entry point. That's not a coincidence. That's a plan. She tilted her head slightly. And you're not the one who made it. Enzo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Kelechi behind the counter, who had not moved and had not stopped watching him with those deep, patient eyes. Then he looked at Taesung. The man by the wall had his arms at his sides now, hands open. He was not trying to run. He was not reaching for anything. He was just standing there in the corner Ada had pointed to, the one blind spot in the room, looking at Enzo like a man who had rehearsed this conversation 100 times and was finally ready to have it. Sit down, Enzo, Kelechi said from behind the counter. Quiet. Steady. Like she was certain he would. Enzo did not sit down, but he did lower the gun. Just slightly. Just enough that it was pointing at the floor instead of at Taesung's chest. It was the smallest movement in the world, but in that room, at that moment, it felt like a door opening. Kelechi came around the counter slowly, the way you move around a dog that hasn't decided what it wants to do yet. She picked up a clean mug from the shelf behind her, filled it with coffee from the pot that had been sitting warm this whole time, and set it on the nearest table. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down across from it. Not beside it. Across from it. She was not offering him comfort. She was offering him a conversation. Your father called this place the House of Salt, she said, because salt preserves things, keeps them from rotting. She folded her hands on the table. He built it for moments exactly like this one. Enzo's jaw tightened. My father never told me about any diner. No, Kelechi agreed. He didn't. Because he was hoping you would never need it. She looked at him steadily. He was wrong about a lot of things. But he loved you the right way. Even when he did it badly. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Somewhere in the kitchen, something was still warm on the stove, and the smell of it, pepper soup, maybe, or something close, moved through the room like a memory. Marco and Dante had not left. But they had stopped looking like men waiting for an order and started looking like men caught in the middle of something they didn't fully understand. Enzo noticed. He noticed everything, always. It was the one habit his father had built into him so deep it would never come out. How do you know that language? He asked Kelechi. That dialect. It's not something you learn in a class. No, she said. You learn it in a kitchen. At 6 a.m., before the rest of the house is awake. Sitting across from a woman who is teaching you the words she uses with her husband, so that if anything ever goes wrong, you will know exactly what to say to the right person. She paused. Your mother taught me, Enzo. In Seoul. When I was 19 years old and new to that house and terrified of everything in it. The word landed on him like something physical. He didn't speak. I was their nanny, Kelechi said. For 3 years, I lived in that house. I cooked. I cleaned. I learned the language because your mother said a person who shares your roof should share your words. She glanced at Ada, who had moved quietly to a stool near the counter and was sitting with her hands in her lap, watching. I was there when this diner was built. I was there when your father made the agreement with the Kim family. I was there when everything started to break apart. Her voice stayed even. And I was there the night they told me to take Ada and run. Enzo looked at Ada. Ada looked back at him without blinking. She is Taesung's daughter, Kelechi said, which makes her your niece. Your father's bloodline, through the Kim side, which he never told you existed because he was trying to protect it. She leaned forward slightly. The same blood you came here tonight to erase. The gun was fully down now. Enzo hadn't decided to lower it. His arm had simply made the decision on its own. Taesung spoke for the first time. His voice was rough, like someone who had been holding words back for a very long time. I wasn't running from you, he said. I was running to get here before Dragunov's people moved the girl. This diner is the only place with the documents. The proof. He looked at Enzo. The proof that he stole everything and put your name on the crime. The room held its breath. Kelechi reached into her apron pocket and placed a small brass key on the table between them. Old. Heavy. Engraved on one side with a single character. The Korean word for truth. Your father left this here, she said quietly. He said you'd come someday. She slid it across the table toward him. He said you'd be angry when you arrived, but that you'd listen eventually. A small, tired smile crossed her face. He knew you better than you know yourself. Ada slid off the stool without a word. She moved to the far end of the counter, reached underneath it with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, and pulled out a small laptop that had been taped to the underside of the shelf with electrical tape. She set it on the counter, opened it, and began typing before anyone had thought to ask her what she was doing. Enzo watched her. He was still standing. He had not touched the coffee or the brass key. Some part of him was not ready to sit down yet, because sitting down meant accepting that the shape of this night had changed completely, and he was still working on that. There are 6 cameras, Ada said, without looking up from the screen. Outside and in. Your father installed them. She turned the laptop around, so the counter faced the room. Kelechi taught me how to read them. The screen was divided into 6 small boxes, each one showing a different angle. The street out front, the alley on the left side, the parking area behind the diner, the side door with the broken lock, the roof of the building across the street, and one more, a wide shot of the block, taken from somewhere high, that showed the full picture of everything surrounding them. Enzo stepped closer. Count the cars, Ada said. He counted. For vehicles on the street. 2 in the parking area behind. 1 in the alley with its lights off, engine running, exhaust rising slowly in the dark. Now count the ones that were there before you arrived, Ada said. She tapped a key and the screen split, showing the same feeds from 40 minutes earlier. Same cars. Same positions. All of them already in place before Enzo's convoy had even turned onto the block. Enzo went very still. They were here first, Ada said simply. Before you. Before us. They knew exactly where you were going tonight. She pointed to the car in the alley. That one has been running for 53 minutes. The driver hasn't moved. He's waiting for a signal. She moved her finger to the rooftop feed. 2 people up there. See the glare. Scope reflections. They've adjusted their angle twice in the last 20 minutes. She looked at Enzo. They're not covering you. They're aimed at you. Marco made a sound behind Enzo. A sharp, short sound, like someone had pressed something cold against the back of his neck. That's not possible, Dante said. But his voice had lost its firmness. Those are our people out there. No, Ada said. She pulled up a separate window on the screen, a series of photographs, time-stamped and clear. Men in familiar jackets. Men Enzo recognized. Standing in a restaurant he recognized too, a place Dragunov used for meetings, seated at a table with 2 of Dragunov's senior lieutenants. The timestamps on the photos were from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when Enzo had been planning this exact operation. Dragunov didn't follow you here tonight, Ada said, closing the laptop gently. He built the road you walked in on. Every step. She looked at him without any drama in her face, just the plain, patient delivery of facts. Your team told him the target. Your team told him the location. Your team told him the timing. She paused. You were never the hunter tonight, Mr. Caruso. You were the instrument. The room was completely silent. Enzo turned and looked at Marco, then at Dante. He looked at them the way he looked at everything, carefully, completely, reading every small thing their faces were trying not to show. Marco's eyes went to the floor half a second too early. Dante's right hand moved slightly toward his jacket and then stopped, catching itself. Half a second. Half an inch. It was enough. Enzo had built his whole life on reading exactly those kinds of tiny, half-finished movements. He knew what they meant. He had always known what they meant. He just had not wanted to know it about these two men, who had eaten at his table and stood at his shoulder for 4 years. He breathed in slowly through his nose. Then he looked at Tae-sung, who was watching him from the corner with quiet, steady eyes. How long have you known? Enzo asked. Long enough, Tae-sung said. That's why I stopped running. He looked at his daughter, then back at Enzo, and started waiting for you to figure it out. Tae-sung reached into his jacket. Every muscle in the room tensed at once. Marco shifted. Dante's hand moved again. But Enzo raised one finger, just one, just slightly, and everyone went still. He kept his eyes on Tae-sung and waited. What came out of the jacket was not a weapon. It was a book. Small, old. Bound in dark brown leather with the corners worn soft from years of handling. The kind of book that had been carried close to a person's body for so long it had taken on the shape of them. Tae-sung set it on the table beside the brass key and the untouched coffee and stepped back, hands open, giving Enzo the space to come to it on his own terms. Enzo looked at the book. He did not move toward it yet. Your father called it the Bloodline Ledger, Tae-sung said. He started it the year he married your mother. Everything went into it. Every agreement. Every name. Every transaction between the Caruso family and the Kim family going back 26 years. He paused. Every signature. Including Dragunov's. From before he had enough power to start rewriting history. Enzo walked to the table. He pulled out the chair across from Kelechi and sat down. Not because he was ready. Because his legs had quietly decided that standing was no longer the right response to what was happening around him. He picked up the book. The cover was smooth under his fingers. On the inside of the front page, in his father's handwriting, that small, tight script he would know anywhere, was a single line in Korean and Italian, side by side, like two hands holding each other. What blood builds, only blood can protect. He turned the pages slowly. Names he knew. Names he didn't. Dates going back further than he had expected. Columns of figures, agreements, territories. And woven through all of it, in a different ink, in a different hand, a second layer of notes. Corrections. Warnings. Things added later by someone who had seen where the story was going. My father added those second notes, Tae-sung said quietly, coming to stand at the edge of the table. The year before he died. He knew Dragunov was moving against both families. He knew the plan was to turn you against me. Eliminate us both through each other. He touched the edge of the book gently. He tried to get a message to your father. It arrived too late. Enzo stopped on a page near the middle of the book. There was a photograph tucked into the spine. Small. Slightly faded at the edges. Two men standing in front of a building he recognized now. This building, this diner, years younger and freshly painted. One man was his father. The other was an older Korean man with the same jaw and the same careful eyes as the man standing across the table from him now. Between the two men, small enough to be easy to miss, was a child, maybe 4 years old, dark-haired, looking up at both of them with an expression of complete trust. Enzo looked at the photograph for a long time. That's you, Kelechi said softly from across the table. Your father brought you once, when you were very small. You don't remember it. She smiled just barely. You ate 3 bowls of rice and fell asleep under that table right there. Something moved through Enzo's chest that he did not have a clean name for. It was not grief exactly. It was not anger. It was closer to the feeling of finding a room in a house you thought you knew completely. A room that had always been there, that you had simply never opened. Dragunov needs us both gone, Tae-sung said. Because as long as we are both alive and this book exists, he cannot own what he stole. The ledger proves the empire was built by both families together. It proves his claim to the territory is false. It proves everything. He met Enzo's eyes. He didn't send you here to finish a blood feud, Enzo. He sent you here to destroy the only evidence that could finish him. Enzo closed the book carefully. He set it flat on the table with both hands resting on top of it. Then he looked at Ada, who was watching him from the counter with those quiet, measuring eyes. She looked exactly like the photograph. She has your mother's hands, Taesung said, gently, like he knew exactly what Enzo was seeing. Your mother used to hold things the same way, like they were worth something. Enzo did not answer. But for the first time since he had kicked open that door, he was no longer thinking about pulling a trigger. The window came in first. Not the whole thing, just the top left corner. A single clean hole punched through the glass that sent a spider web of cracks racing across the entire pane in half a second. The shot that made it was completely silent. Suppressed. Professional. The kind of shot that announces itself only by what it breaks, never by the sound it makes. The wine glass on the table nearest the window exploded into powder. Then everyone was moving. Down. Enzo was already across the room before the word finished leaving his mouth. One hand grabbing Ada off the stool and pulling her below the counter line, the other reaching back for Kelechi with an instinct that surprised even him. He had not decided to protect them. His body had simply done it, the way it did everything that had been trained deep enough to skip the thinking stage entirely. Taesung dropped behind the overturned table. Marco and Dante hit the floor on opposite sides of the room, and for one strange, stretched second, Enzo did not know whose side they were going to choose. Then Marco pulled his weapon and put 2 shots through the side door before it had fully opened. And the man coming through it went backward and did not get up. Dante covered the front. Enzo filed that away. They had chosen and moved. Kelechi, he said low and fast, pressing his back against the counter. How many exits? Front, side, kitchen back door, and the cellar hatch under the far rug, she said. Her voice was steady. She had pulled Ada close against her side and was covering the child's head with her arm without any panic in her face at all. The way someone moves when they have already thought through this exact situation and decided how they would handle it. The cellar, Ada said from against Kelechi's shoulder. Her voice was slightly muffled, but completely calm. It connects to the building next door through a passage my grandfather dug in 1987. Comes up in the laundry room. Enzo stared at her for one full second. Your grandfather, he repeated. He was cautious, Ada said simply. Another shot came through the front window, higher this time, tracing across the top of the counter and taking out a row of mugs in a single clean sweep. Ceramic fragments rained down on them like rough confetti. The lights above the counter flickered once and held. Enzo raised his head, just enough to see the rooftop across the street. 2 shapes, both moving now, repositioning, which meant they had realized their first angle wasn't working and were adjusting. He had maybe 90 seconds before they found a better line. Marco, he said. Side door. Hold it. Dante, kitchen, watch the back. He looked at Taesung, who had produced a small handgun from somewhere inside his jacket and was checking it with practiced hands. Enzo noticed but did not comment. There would be time for that conversation later. You with me. Taesung nodded once. No hesitation. Enzo looked at Kelechi. The cellar hatch. How fast can you get there? Faster than you'd think, she said. Then move on my signal. He looked at Ada. Stay against her. Do not lift your head above counter height. Can you do that? Ada looked at him with those steady, serious eyes. I've been doing it since the first shot, she said. He almost said something. He didn't. He checked his weapon, rolled left, and came up in a low crouch behind the far end of the counter. From this angle he could see the front window, the side door Marco was holding, and the thin strip of darkness under the kitchen door where the shadows moved wrong. There was a third man. Inside. Already in the kitchen. Dante didn't know yet. Dante. Enzo was already moving as he shouted, crossing the open floor in 3 long strides. Shoulder hitting the kitchen door hard enough to swing it all the way open and crash it against the wall. The man inside spun toward the sound, and Enzo was already past his reaction time, already inside his reach, already done. It took 4 seconds. He came back through the kitchen door, straightening his sleeve. Clear, he said quietly. Taesung looked at him from across the diner with an expression that was complicated and tired and something close to grateful. You're better at this than I remembered, he said. Enzo picked up the bloodline ledger from the table where he had left it, tucked it inside his jacket against his chest, and looked toward the cellar hatch. Signal, he said to Kelechi. She was already moving. The cellar passage was narrow and smelled like old earth and dry wood. Kelechi moved through it without hesitation, one hand trailing the wall, the other holding Ada's wrist. Enzo followed, then Tae-sung, then Marco and Dante in that order. All of them bent low under the ceiling that had clearly been built for a smaller era. A single strip of battery-powered lights ran along the top of the left wall, dim and yellow, throwing long shadows behind them as they moved. They had made it maybe 30 feet when Ada stopped. "They'll cover the laundry room exit," she said. "If they're organized. They already have someone there." Enzo looked at Kelechi. Kelechi looked at Ada. "She's right," Kelechi said. "Dragunov's people are organized. So we don't go through the laundry room," Ada said. She turned and pointed back the way they had come. "We go back. We use the diner." Dante made a short sound of disbelief. "We just left the diner. Because we were running," Ada said patiently. "That's different from choosing it." She looked at Enzo. "They don't know the building the way we do." Kelechi does. "I do. You have the firepower." She said it the way someone states a simple fact, like 2 plus 2. That's an advantage. Leaving throws it away. The passage was quiet except for their breathing and the distant, muffled sound of movement above them. Boots on a floor. More than 2 people. Searching. Enzo looked at the ceiling for a moment, listening, calculating. Then he looked at Ada. "Show me," he said. They went back. Kelechi went first through the cellar hatch. Slow and careful, coming up behind the long counter in the section of the diner furthest from the front windows. She checked both directions and waved them up one by one. The diner was darker now. Someone had cut the main lights from outside, leaving only the emergency strip above the kitchen door and the pale wash of streetlight coming through the cracked front window, which meant the room belonged to whoever knew it best. "Storage room," Kelechi said softly, moving to the kitchen. She pulled open a floor cabinet and lifted out a large metal pot. Already full, still warm from the stove. She carried it back to the counter and set it on the portable burner with quiet efficiency. It takes 4 minutes to boil. The hallway between the dining room and the kitchen is exactly 3 feet wide. She met Enzo's eyes. One person, one direction. No room to dodge. "The fryer is still hot," Ada added from behind her. She was pointing to the far side of the kitchen, speaking in the same low, precise tone she had used since the beginning. The ventilation duct above it runs the full length of the ceiling and exits above the side door. Sound carries through it perfectly. You can hear every word spoken near that door from inside the kitchen. Marco was staring at her. "I spent a lot of time in this kitchen," Ada said simply, answering the question he hadn't asked. "The mirrors," Kelechi said to Enzo, gesturing toward the dining room. "There are 4 of them, positioned so that from the kitchen doorway you can see every table, both windows, and the front entrance without showing yourself." She said it like she was describing the lunch menu. "Your father designed it that way. He said a good room should never have a corner that surprises you." Enzo moved to the kitchen doorway and looked out at the mirrors. She was right. From this single spot, he could see almost the entire dining room reflected back at him in overlapping angles. A complete picture assembled from 4 separate pieces of glass. It was, he realized, an extraordinarily well-designed room. He had just never looked at it that way before. The ventilation duct clicked softly. Then voices came through it. Low and close, 2 men near the side door working out how to enter without crossing the open window line. Enzo listened for 10 seconds. Then he looked at Marco and pointed to the hallway. Marco nodded and moved into position without a sound, the large pot between him and the hallway entrance ready. Enzo looked at Ada. "Good call," he said quietly. "Coming back." Ada straightened slightly. Just slightly. The way a person does when they have worked very hard at something and someone has finally noticed. "I know this place," she said. "This is home." The 2 men near the side door never made it through. Marco handled that quietly and efficiently, and afterward the diner settled into a different kind of silence. Not the frozen silence of before, when everyone was waiting for something to explode. This was the silence of a battle that had paused to catch its breath. The silence of people who were still alive and knew it could change at any moment. Enzo counted what he had. 2 loyal men, tired but steady. Tae-sung, who could handle himself. Kelechi, who knew every inch of this building. Ada, who knew everything else. Outside, based on what he had heard through the duct and what Ada had shown him on the laptop, there were still 7 men, possibly 8. Dragunov's people, professional and patient, regrouping after losing 3 of their own. They would not rush now. They would wait. tighten the circle, and let time do the work for them. Enzo did not intend to give them time. He looked at his watch. It was a simple thing on the surface. Silver face. Leather strap, the kind of watch that did not announce itself. But built into the casing, behind the crown, was a communications piece his tech man had fitted 3 years ago. A short-range frequency transmitter that could reach any receiver tuned to his private channel. Every senior man in his organization carried one, including the men outside who were no longer his. He pressed the crown twice. Waited. Pressed it once more. A small crackle of static. Then a voice, careful and neutral. Who's calling? Enzo recognized the voice. Petrov, one of Dragunov's mid-level coordinators. A practical man. A man who had worked for 3 different bosses in 8 years and was still alive because he understood, better than most, how to read which way a situation was falling. Caruso, Enzo said. Silence on the other end. Long enough to mean something. You're supposed to be contained, Petrov said finally. And yet, Enzo said. Another pause. Enzo could hear the man thinking. He let him think. Rushing a practical man never worked. You had to give him space to arrive at the right conclusion on his own. What do you want? Petrov asked. The same thing you want, Enzo said. To still be breathing in an hour. He kept his voice level and easy. The way his father had taught him to speak when the real negotiation was happening. Not loud. Not hard. Just clear. Dragunov sent you here to clean up a problem. The problem being me, and the people in this building. But here is what Dragunov didn't tell you. He paused just long enough. The problem has documentation. Names. Accounts. Transactions. Enough to bury every person whose signature appears in a certain ledger. He let that settle. I'm guessing your name is in that ledger. Petrov. The silence this time was a different shape. I'm also guessing, Enzo continued, that Dragunov has not recently mentioned what happens to his people once this job is finished. Whether they get paid. Whether they get to go home. He looked at the bloodline ledger tucked inside his jacket. Men who carry out an operation like this one don't usually get to retire quietly. They become loose ends. Kalechi was watching him from across the kitchen. Taesung too. Neither of them spoke. What are you offering? Petrov asked. His voice had shifted. Just slightly. The neutrality was thinner now, and underneath it was the sound of a man doing fast, serious arithmetic. A debt swap, Enzo said. You're currently holding Dragunov's debt. You do this job, he owes you. Maybe he pays. Maybe he doesn't. That's a bad position. He reached up and touched the watch crown lightly. Transfer the debt to me. Walk your people back right now, tonight, quietly. In return, when this ledger becomes public, and it will become public, your cooperation is on record. Your name moves from one column to another. The line was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the ventilation duct, Enzo heard the faint sound of footsteps. Moving. But not toward the diner. Away from it. We're pulling back, Petrov said. Flat. Final. The voice of a practical man who had finished his arithmetic and did not like the answer he had found under Dragunov's column. This conversation didn't happen. Agreed, Enzo said. He released the watch crown and looked up. Ada was watching him from the kitchen doorway with an expression he was starting to recognize. That careful, measuring look she used when she was filing something away for later. That was a debt swap, she said. Yes, Enzo said. She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when something confirmed a theory she had already been building. Kalechi explained that strategy to me once, she said. I didn't think it worked on mercenaries. It works on anyone, Enzo said, who is smarter than the person who hired them. For the first time since he had walked through that door, Ada Chikazi almost smiled. The diner was quiet in a way it had not been all night. Not the tight, breathless quiet of a room waiting for violence. Something slower and warmer than that. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, and the air is clean, and everything that was shaking has finally decided to be still. Kalechi turned the main lights back on. She did it without ceremony, just reached up and pressed the switch, and the warm yellow glow came back across the dining room like a curtain being pulled open. The broken window let in a thin line of night air. The cracked mugs and the shattered wine glass had been swept to one side. The overturned table had been righted. It was still a diner. It had always been a diner. Marco and Dante were outside, watching the street. Taesung was in the back on a call. His voice low and steady through the kitchen wall. The business of survival, Enzo knew, involved a long list of calls made in low voices after the immediate danger had passed. He understood that. He had been making those calls his whole adult life. But for right now, for this specific moment, he was sitting at a table in the middle of the dining room while Kelechi moved around the kitchen, and the smell of something real and warm began to fill the air. Ada sat across from him. She had her elbows on the table and her chin resting on her folded hands, and she was watching him with the patient, open curiosity of someone who has decided that a person is worth studying. Not judging, just studying. There was a difference, and she seemed to know it. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Enzo looked up. "Does what hurt?" She nodded toward his forearms, where the tattoos ran from his wrists up past his elbows. Dark ink, dense and layered, years of it. Symbols and patterns and names that told the story of every crew he had belonged to, every oath he had taken, every piece of himself he had traded away for a place to stand. "Getting them," she said. "Some of them," he said. "You stop noticing after a while." She considered this seriously. "What do they mean? All of them?" He looked down at his arms. He had not looked at them this way in a long time. Not as a collection of meanings. Just as part of himself, like the way his hands looked or the sound of his own voice. Something he had stopped seeing because it had always been there. "This one," he said, turning his left forearm toward her and pointing to a pattern near his wrist, "is the Caruso family mark. My father had the same one." He paused. "I thought that was everything, for a long time. The name, the mark, the blood." He looked at the ledger sitting on the table between them, the brass key resting on top of it. "I thought if I protected those things hard enough, I was protecting something real." Kelechi came through the kitchen door carrying 2 bowls and set them on the table without comment. Pepper soup, rich and dark, with a stack of soft bread on a plate beside it. She went back and returned with a 3rd bowl for herself and sat down at the end of the table, unhurried. Like this was simply what came next. The soup was extraordinary. Enzo did not say that out loud, but he ate, and the warmth of it moved through him in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the kind of food that reminded you that your body was a real thing, that you were a person sitting in a room, that the ground under the chair was solid. "My mother used to say," Kelechi said, breaking bread slowly, "that a man who only knows his own name is only half a person. You need the names of the people who made you, and the names of the people you are going to make." She looked at Enzo steadily. "You have both of those now." Enzo looked at Ada. Ada looked back at him over the edge of her bowl with those grave, careful eyes. "I came here tonight to end something," he said, quietly. "To no one in particular, and to all of them at once." "You did end something," Taesung said from the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and his phone in his hand. His voice was tired, but the weight had shifted out of it. Just not what Dragunov planned. Enzo set his spoon down. He picked up the brass key and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the engraved character on its face. The Korean word for truth. Small and heavy and older than everything he had built. He set it back down gently, not letting go of it, just setting it down with intention. The way you put something in a place you have decided it belongs. "Dragunov thinks this is over," Enzo said. "Let him think that," Kelechi said. "Comfortable men make slow decisions. We have the ledger," Taesung said. "And we have people in 4 cities who have been waiting for someone with the Caruso name to point them in the right direction." He looked at his daughter. Ada mapped out the contact list 2 weeks ago. Enzo looked at Ada. Ada had returned to her soup. But she glanced up at him from under her brows with an expression that was almost modest. "You had time to do that?" he asked. "I had a lot of evenings," she said simply. The ceiling fan turned slowly above them. Outside, the city continued doing what cities do, indifferent and constant. But inside the diner, around this table, something had been built in the space of a single night that had taken years of separate, invisible threads to make ready for. Not a crew. Not a family in the old, hard sense of the word, built on fear and obligation and the threat of what happened if you left. Something more durable than that. Enzo looked at the tattoos on his arms one more time. The ink his father had pressed on him like a seal. The marks of every alliance he had made and every truth he had buried under the weight of a name. The ink was still there. It would always be there. But it was not the whole story anymore. He picked up his spoon. He finished his soup. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Enzo Caruso sat at a table with people who knew exactly who he was and had chosen, with full information, to sit there with him. Outside, Dragunov was comfortable. That would not last long.